Imagine two people walking into separate dealerships on the same day. Both need transportation. Both have similar incomes. Both leave with a vehicle they are happy to drive. The difference is that one person is focused on ownership while the other is focused on keeping the monthly payment as low as possible. At first, the lease appears to win. The vehicle is newer, the payment is lower, and the experience feels surprisingly affordable. Yet years later, the financial outcomes often look very different, and the reason has less to do with cars than with the mathematics of recurring payments and the psychology of consumption. The car lease industry was not built around helping people own vehicles. It was built around helping people access vehicles. That distinction sounds subtle, but it changes everything. Ownership is a destination. Access is a subscription. When people buy a vehicle and eventually pay it off, there is a point where the monthly payment disappears. When people lease, the payment rarely disappears. One lease often leads directly into another, creating a cycle that can last decades. From a psychological perspective, leasing solves a problem that many consumers care deeply about. It reduces the immediate financial pain of acquiring a vehicle. Instead of evaluating a car based on its total cost, people evaluate it based on a monthly payment. A $40,000 vehicle sounds expensive. A $400 monthly payment feels manageable. The industry understands this difference extremely well because consumers naturally anchor their decisions around monthly affordability rather than lifetime cost. This is where the mathematics become important. A lease payment is not primarily paying for ownership. It is paying for the vehicle's expected depreciation during the lease period, along with fees, financing costs, and profit margins. At the end of the contract, the driver has spent thousands of dollars but typically owns nothing. The vehicle returns to the dealership and the cycle begins again. Consider a driver who spends $400 per month leasing vehicles throughout adulthood. Over 10 years, that represents nearly $50,000 in payments. Over 20 years, nearly $100,000. Over 30 years, well over $100,000, often without ending up with a fully owned asset. The exact figures vary, but the underlying pattern remains remarkably consistent. The payment continues because the system depends on continuation. The industry is not necessarily hiding this reality. In many cases, consumers simply do not evaluate purchases across long enough time horizons. Human beings are naturally biased toward the present. Behavioral economists refer to this tendency as present bias. Immediate benefits often feel more important than distant consequences. The new car smell, the upgraded technology, the lower payment, and the sense of driving something modern create benefits that are experienced today. The long-term financial cost is experienced gradually, making it far less emotionally powerful during the decision process. This creates a fascinating economic dynamic. The lease customer often becomes less sensitive to the actual price of the vehicle because the focus shifts toward the monthly number. As long as the payment remains within a comfortable range, increasingly expensive vehicles can appear attainable. The result is that consumers sometimes drive cars that would have seemed financially unrealistic if they were forced to think about the total purchase price. The system works particularly well because it aligns with another powerful psychological force: lifestyle adaptation. People quickly become accustomed to higher standards of comfort. Features that once felt luxurious soon begin to feel normal. After a few years in a newer vehicle, stepping down to something older can feel like a loss, even if the older vehicle meets the same transportation needs. This makes the next lease easier to justify because the comparison is no longer between transportation options. It is between current comfort and perceived sacrifice. In the past, this represents a major shift in how consumers relate to automobiles. For much of the 20th century, the typical financial goal was ownership. A car payment was temporary. People expected a period of payment followed by a period of ownership. The vehicle eventually became an asset that could continue providing transportation without generating a monthly obligation. Modern leasing changes that expectation. Transportation becomes a recurring service rather than a completed purchase. In many ways, the automobile has begun to resemble other subscription-based products throughout the economy. Instead of reaching a point where payments end, consumers move from one agreement to another. The transaction becomes continuous rather than finite. This does not mean leasing is always a poor decision. Certain business owners, frequent vehicle upgraders, or drivers with specific needs may find legitimate advantages in leasing. The issue arises when consumers assume that the lowest monthly payment automatically represents the best financial choice. A lower payment can sometimes mask a more expensive long-term outcome. The deeper lesson extends beyond cars. Leasing illustrates a broader economic principle that appears throughout modern consumer life. Many industries have discovered that people are more willing to commit to small recurring payments than large one-time purchases. Streaming services, software subscriptions, financing plans, and vehicle leases all rely on the same psychological mechanism. The monthly cost feels manageable. The cumulative cost receives far less attention. When examined through this lens, the question is not whether leasing is good or bad. The more important question is what happens when recurring payments become a permanent feature of financial life. Every payment represents money that cannot be directed toward savings, investing, emergency reserves, debt reduction, or future flexibility. The impact is often gradual rather than dramatic, which is precisely why it goes unnoticed. This creates a fascinating economic dynamic. The lease customer often becomes less sensitive to the actual price of the vehicle because the focus shifts toward the monthly number. As long as the payment remains within a comfortable range, increasingly expensive vehicles can appear attainable. The result is that consumers sometimes drive cars that would have seemed financially unrealistic if they were forced to think about the total purchase price. The most important shift is not financial but psychological. Once people stop asking, "What is the monthly payment?" and start asking, "What is the lifetime cost?" the entire decision begins to look different. The vehicle may be the same, the dealership may be the same, and the contract may be the same, but the perspective changes. And in personal finance, perspective often determines outcome long before the numbers do.